UFC Vegas 48, DraftKings has released the salary so we could take our first look. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. We had a great week last week. I won on DraftKings. I hit a couple of prop bets that we talked about last week. We had a good time. We talked about how Derek Brunson was either going to win a decision or Jared Cannonier was going to win by knockout and how we could bet both sides and still make money. So I did exactly that, and at the end of the fight, I was sitting there. So I'm happy with the outcome. But this is the first look. We start at the top of the slate and work our way down at 9,300. We have JSP. Jonathan Pierce is fighting Christian Rodriguez this week, and he looks like a stone cold lock. He was originally supposed to fight Austin Lingo, but now Christian Rodriguez is making his UFC debut on extremely short notice. And even before the opponent changed, Jonathan Pierce looked like a must play on DraftKings, just given his style. You see 11 takedowns in the last two fights, scoring must-need points when you're talking about showing up on the winning lineup. And he looked dominant in his last fight against Omar Morales, just smothering him with the takedowns, and I think we see more of that for as long as this fight lasts. The pick for me for this fight is JSP inside the first round. I'm going to go with first round TKO. Next at 9,200, we have Chad Anheliger. He's going to be making his UFC debut against Jesse Strader this week, and he's got a pretty favorable matchup. He looks live for a finish in this spot. There's a lot to like about Anheliger. He hasn't lost a fight since 2014. Now, he hasn't been the most active since then, but he started 2-5, so he scrapped to get his record to where it is today at 11-5. Jesse Strader, on the other hand, he has pretty limited experience as a pro. And when you look back on his fights, you do notice that he beats guys with limited experience or bad records. But when he comes up against guys like Marcelo Rojo before coming into the UFC, or Montel Jackson when he made his debut, UFC caliber talent, he's out of there inside the first round. And I don't know if the finish will be that quick in this fight, but I do expect it to come at some point. The pick for me is Chad Anheliger inside the distance. I think if the line is at 2.5 rounds, this would be a good fight to take the under in. At 9,000, we have Jamal Hill. He's our new main event since they moved Fiziev and Dos Anjos. He's fighting Johnny Walker, and I expect a knockout win for Jamal Hill in this spot. In his last fight, I picked Jimmy Crute to win. I expected the grappling to be too much, but yeah, it was probably the first and last time that I'm going to be betting against Sweet Dreams Hill. What I like about Hill is not only the hand speed, that's obvious, but just how straight the punches are. His boxing just looks natural, precise, crisp, and I think it's going to give Johnny Walker serious problems. Walker is 1-3 in his last 4 fights, and while he's got size and power to finish anybody in the division, it looks like the division has started to figure him out. Corey Anderson set the blueprint, right? Get in Johnny Walker's face, throw with bad intentions, and keep the pressure on him. You will get him out of there. And at the very least, you'll make him uncomfortable. And an uncomfortable Johnny Walker is very hittable. He's low output. And I think you saw a lot of that in that snooze fest that he had against Thiago Santos in his last time out. And he's got a dangerous striker on his hands in Jamal Hill. And Jamal Hill's somebody who's going to take the fight to him. He's going to keep throwing punches. He's going to stay in his face. And if he starts landing like he's normally landing, I expect Johnny Walker to be knocked out probably inside the first 3 rounds. The pick for me for this fight is Jamal Hill by knockout. At 8,900, we have Parker Porter. He's going to be fighting Alan Bedoe this week. In Parker's last 2 fights, he's thrown over 300 total strikes. He's also gotten takedowns in these fights, so the grappling upside is there. He's on a 2-fight winning streak, and if he looks how he did in those fights, he should have no problem getting the win in this spot. Alan Bedoe's claim to fame is being Cyril Gane's training partner, but it hasn't shown much in the UFC. He's got back-to-back knockout losses. Granted, he made his debut against Tom Aspinall and then fought Alan Nascimento, who later popped. So you can make the argument that he's taking a step down comparatively by fighting Parker Porter in this spot. But I think he's going to struggle with the pace, the output, and really just the physicality that Parker Porter's going to bring to him on Saturday night. And I like that Parker Porter isn't throwing everything into his strikes. He's just touching his opponent. And I think if he just touches up Alan Bedoe, he's going to go down at some point. He is a kill or be killed kind of guy. He doesn't see the judge's scorecard all that often. So give me Parker Porter by knockout. I'm going to say probably somewhere in the 3rd round. Next at 8,700, we have Chaz Skelly. And up until this point, we've picked all the favorites. I think we have some value on the underdog in this spot, and I think we have some extremely sneaky value at that. Chaz Skelly is fighting Mark Striegl this week, and there's a lot like about Chaz Skelly. He's going to have the size advantage, a few inches of height, a few inches in reach. More importantly, he's going to have a massive experience advantage. Now, both these guys have had the same amount of fights, 21 professional fights, but Skelly has been fighting in the UFC since Obama was in office, while Striegl was fighting much lower level competition outside of the UFC. Now, I expect a lot of people to play Chaz Skelly this week for those reasons. And on top of that, I expect people to go to him because of Mark Striegel's debut against Said Nurmagomedov, where he was knocked out right away. This is a spot where we're going to get leverage. This is the first underdog spot that we like. This is where we get Mark Striegl at a dirt cheap price, and he's going to have some advantages. I think that Mark Striegl is going to have a lot of success grappling in this fight, and he may even be live for a submission. I think Striegl by decision is probably the more likely outcome, but I do think that he's going to have a big grappling advantage either way. And the reason why I say that is because Chaz Skelly has fought in the UFC for a while, so we have a big sample size to work with. We know what to expect when we look at UFC stats. We know that we're getting true numbers because we have years and years of data. What the data shows us about Chaz Skelly is that he has around a 33% takedown defense. It's terrible. So Striegel's path to victory is clear. Get this fight to the ground, wear on the 36-year-old Chaz Skelly who hasn't seen octagon action since 2019, and grind him out to a decision, or if the opportunity presents itself, tie something up. The pick for me is Mark Striegl by decision, but I want to say by submission. I think if you put a little bit of money on either, you'll be happy with the end result. Jessica Rose Clark, she's 8,600. She's fighting Stephanie Egger, and there could also be some value on this underdog as well. With so few fights on the card, I expect this fight to come in at lower ownership. If we only end up with 11 fights total, I expect this to probably be the lowest owned fight out of all of them. So there is a good chance that the winner of this fight ends up on the winning lineup. And I don't just say that because they're going to come in at lower ownership, but also the paths to victory that each of these fighters have. If Jessica Rose Clark wins, she's getting takedowns, control time. If Jessica Rose Clark wins this fight, she's going to get takedown, she's going to get control time. Now in her last fight against Jocelyn Edwards, she did virtually nothing after she got the takedown. And even with that super low output on the ground, she was able to score 90 points. I would expect her to be a bit more active in a dominant position in this fight, given how she was in the last fight, and that would make her a great play if she was able to do something like that. And on the other side, you have Stephanie Egger, who's coming off her first UFC win, which was a finish over Shayna Young. That's not saying much, but it is a win. She may be able to get it done. I think she's a very live underdog in this spot. One of the biggest reasons why I say that is because if we watch Jessica Rose Clark's last fight against Jocelyn Edwards, yes, she had all that time in the dominant positions on the ground. She was securing these takedowns. She was working up against the fence. But when distance was created, Jocelyn Edwards was piecing her up from the outside. If Stephanie Egger can keep this fight standing, she's probably going to have success in the striking. Or if she's able to work her own takedowns, then she's going to have success from a dominant position there. And at her price point, she doesn't need to score you a whole lot of points for her to make sense. I would say Stephanie Egger for now. I think Stephanie Egger by decision is probably the most likely outcome. That's also what's going to make your lineups work best. At 8,500, we have Nicolas Mata. He's fighting Jim Miller this week. Mata's making his UFC debut, and this looks like a very tough spot for him. The biggest challenge that fighters who are making their debut run into are nerves and the experience gap between them and their opponent. Jim Miller is experienced. Most fights in UFC history, very comfortable in the fight, solid hands, and killer jiu-jitsu. I expect all of that to be way too much for Mata in his UFC debut, and I do expect Jim Miller to get the submission win in this spot. And I picked against Jim Miller in his last fight against Eric Gonzalez, but he showed in that fight that he is still able to take one to give one, and that he still has pop at the end of his shots. So I expect this fight to go similarly. I think Mata will have success in spots. I think he will land to get a big reaction out of Jim Miller, but I expect Jim Miller to fire back, probably find something on the ground, and get the job done inside the distance. The pick for me for this fight is Jim Miller by submission, but I think the under, if it's at 2.5 rounds, is a much better play, much safer bet. At 8,400, we have David Onama. He's probably one of the most popular plays on the slate, but he's also one of the best plays on the slate this week. He's fighting Gabriel Benitez, and I expect Onama to pick up the win. In his last fight in October, he fought Mason Jones, stepped in on real short notice, and gave Jones a tough fight, a real competitive fight. And the main takeaways from that fight were that he's got his first loss out of the way. Prior to that, he was just 8-0. So he's not worried about protecting a perfect record. He's also got 15 minutes at a grueling pace under his belt. So we know that his cardio is good, which we were kind of uncertain about considering that he was finishing a lot of his other fights inside the first or second round. Well, we know the power's there because he's finishing these fights. He's got the cardio. He's coming out of a good gym. There's a lot to like about Onama this week. And on the other side, you've got Gabriel Benitez. He's the more experienced fighter. Sure, he has more losses than David Onama has fights. And he's been in the UFC for a while, but he hasn't had the best results. And he has wins over guys like Sam Sicilia, Jason Knight, Humberto Bondinai, Justin James. But whenever he faces that step up in competition, he gets turned away, he loses. I think that David Onama is, talent-wise, a lot closer to the guys that Gabriel Benitez loses to than somebody like Humberto Bondinai. This isn't a Fabio Charant situation where the guy steps in on short notice to fight a big favorite, loses, and then just loses a couple of other fights and gets cut. David Onama was somebody who was probably going to be in the UFC shortly anyway. I think the future looks bright for him. He is the pick this week, and it's Onama inside the distance at 8,400. Probably a must play. At 8,300, the people's main event, Joaquin Buckley fighting Abdul Razak Alhassan, should be a banger. There's no chance this fight goes the distance. No chance at all. Both these guys have big power for the division, so they're both live for a knockout, and this is the spot where you're going to need one of them in your lineup. I'm leaning toward Buckley in this spot. I think he's got better pressure, cardio, and just overall fighting style. His losses are a short notice debut to Kevin Holland, where he gave him a competitive fight, and then he has a fluke head kick loss to Alessio Di Chirico. Outside of that, amazing knockout over Impa Kasanganay, roughed up Jordan Wright, knocked out Antonio Arroyo late in the fight, so he's looked great. On the other side, Abdul Razak Alhassan, he has had great moments in the UFC, but he has been skidding in the last couple of years. The knockout win over Di Chirico doesn't really tell us much about where he is at this point in his career because it was just kind of with the first thing that he threw. But before that, he was on a 3-fight losing streak, and the fight against Malkoun, he looked terrible. He looked slow. He looked tired. And I think that if Buckley wanted to, he can rely on his forward pressure to get Alhassan thinking, and then change levels, secure a takedown, finish the fight with ground and pound from a dominant position. I like Numansa this week. I don't rule out the possibility of Abdul Razak Alhassan pulling a rabbit out of the hat and getting a knockout in this spot, but Joaquin Buckley is going to be my pick, and I'm actually going to go with Joaquin Buckley by third round knockout. At 8,200, you have Diana Belbita. She's fighting Gloria de Paula this week. I expect a decent amount of people to be on Belbita in this spot. She's the more experienced fighter. She throws a lot of strikes, and de Paula just doesn't look like she belongs in the UFC. De Paula's 5-4 as a pro, 0-2 in the UFC. The loss to Jinyu Frey is not a good look. Belbita looks like a must play this week, just considering the matchup, but also because of that output. You know, she's going to throw a lot of strikes. She may even finish de Paula in this spot. Hopefully, she goes under-owned into your contest because she should not only win but score a decent amount of points. But I wouldn't be shocked if you see 30, 40, 50% of the field playing her this week because of this matchup. 8,200, the Warrior Princess looks like a steal. I'll take Diana Belbita. I think it's by decision. Now, below 8,000, it doesn't look great. It really doesn't. There are a few spots that I like, but I expect a lot of favorites to win this week, just like last week. I think 12 of the 14 favorites won. I think you're going to see something similar in terms of at least the percentage. At 7,900, Abdul Razak Alhassan, he could totally come in here and score a first-round knockout, but I just don't see it. The performances have been really inconsistent lately. I think outside of the first round, he's useless. Give me Joaquin Buckley this week, but I expect a decent amount of people to look for the knockout upside here at 7,900 because if it hits, you're going to need it. Gabriel Benitez at 7,800. I'm really not interested in playing him this week. I think Onama is the much better fighter, athlete, and I think he's going to knock him out. Jim Miller at 7,700. I think that Jim Miller picks up one of these first-round submissions like we've seen in the past. I think that he's going to be able to rock Motta on the feet, find something on the ground. Just Jim Miller. How can you go against Jim Miller? I know I said earlier that I picked against Jim Miller last time, but you know what I mean. Stephanie Egger, I think matchup-wise, when you look at the underdog, she's got a better matchup than a lot of the other fighters here. I think that she could get the job done, especially if she's able to keep the fight at distance. I don't think that Jessica Rose Clark has much to offer on the feet, so Stephanie Egger at 7,600. I see myself getting here this week. Mark Striegl, probably going to be one of the lowest owned fighters on the slate considering what happened in his first fight. No one wants any part of this. This one is the loneliest number. I think that a lot of people are going to be as far away from Mark Striegl as possible. And then when he picks up that third round submission win, everybody's going to be like, oh, stupid Mark Striegl. Blowing up the lineup, breaking the slate, stupid Mark Striegl. And at 7,500, I'll have him in my lineup and I'll be happy about it. Alan Bedoe, I'm not interested. Again, he's got the 2 losses over some solid heavyweights, especially Tom Aspinall, but I think that he'll struggle against most of the roster. I think that he gets a win over somebody like Chase Sherman, beats up Chase Sherman. But outside of that, I think that he would really struggle with the rest of the roster at this level. Johnny Walker, he's going to pull a little bit of ownership just being Johnny Walker and, being known for what he's known for. But I think that this version of Johnny Walker that we have now gets lit up by Jamal Hill. I don't expect him to be able to take it. I think that he's going to get knocked out inside, again, the first 3 rounds. Jesse Strader, again, I don't expect him to win, but if he does win, it's probably going to be inside the distance. So if the line is at 2.5, take the under, but I don't expect him to get it done this week at 7,100. No chance. Not even going to talk about it. That is the first look. Thank you so much for watching. As always, like the video, subscribe to the channel. That way I can bring more of this to you.